For recording's sake, again, my name is Rex Jarrett. I'm the Director of Professional Programs here at UMBC. And if you were here for the University of Maryland, Baltimore County Pause and Pivot webinar series for impacted federal workers, you are in the right place. The Pause and Pivot series was something that the university decided to do in an effort to uplift and support our immediate Maryland and DMV community, as we are one of the largest areas for hired or employed federal workers. And with a lot of changes, a lot of people are experiencing new seasons in life. So we wanted to equip folks with the tools to explore those new seasons and be as prepared for them as possible. And Dr. Neely is our most recent friend in helping us do that. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to her and take it away, Dr. Neely.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm CJ Neely. I'm so excited to be here. I am a PhD trained scientist, but before I earned my PhD, I actually did a summer research experience at UMBC. So it's really nice to be able to give back to the UMBC community, because I was very grateful to be part of it. I do and conduct research there. I believe that it helped me be more competitive as I applied to graduate school and eventually get in and earn a PhD. But I'm not here as a scientist. I'm actually here as a certified career coach. And so many moons ago, about 8 years ago, I actually transitioned from the bench to working with scientists and public health professionals in a career development capacity. And so I've really spent a lot of time helping early to mid senior career professionals really understand their skill set, be able to communicate that effectively, and really progress in their careers. And so what I have seen time and time again is how important it is for us to effectively communicate. You can be the smartest person in the room, but if your ideas don't land, you won't make an impact, at least not the impact that you're looking for. And so today's session is really going to focus on that, how to give a talk that actually connects with audiences, whether it's during staff meeting, a job interview, or on a big stage, such as a conference, or even teaching in the classroom. So my goal is to give you the tools that help you do this the right way, and again, make the impact that you're looking for. So again, you can have the greatest ideas in the world, but if people do not understand what you're trying to tell them, your ideas nor you are really going to make it very far. And so what we've all seen is that great work can get overlooked if it's not communicated correctly. On the other end, when you do present well, not only are you sharing information correctly, but you're really building credibility and trust. And that confidence is what opens doors. It can help you land a new role. It can get you noticed for a promotion, or it can even help you step into a bigger leadership opportunity within your organization. And I believe personally that during times of transition, how you communicate can be different between being heard or being looked over. And I know for me, when I made my transition from a bench scientist into the career and professional development space, I had to effectively communicate who I was, what my value was coming from a PhD training background into a new space, and how that could be applied. So again, it wasn't necessarily in the context of giving a talk, although eventually I did have numerous job talks that I had to give in the process of landing my next position. But the first thing I had to do is be able to communicate my value on a day-to-day basis through networking and things like that. So again, what we're talking about today will mostly focus in on how to communicate your ideas in the context of a presentation, but a lot of this will also be helpful in communicating on a day-to-day situation. And so here's a formula that I always go back to when I think about effective communication, which is message plus delivery equals impact. So your message, what you want people to know, is critical, but your delivery, how you say it, is what people remember. And I quickly just want to share a story that I was at a major conference, I want to say about a week ago, that was held by the American Association for Medical Colleges. So quite a big conference. And there was someone there about talking about executive presence and sharing your message to make it stick, very similar to what I'm doing here. And all of the tips that they were giving were very similar to what I'll be sharing with you today. But unfortunately, their delivery wasn't very impactful. And so the person next to me, like, actually wrote down a note about how this person was like incredibly boring and they were about to fall asleep. So again, you can know more about a topic than other people, but if you are not delivering that in a way that really sticks with your audience, you're not going to make that impact that you're looking for. But I will say on the flip side of this, a really simple idea can shine if you're delivering it with energy and clarity. So this goes two ways. Like, if you can deliver it well, it makes an impact. Your message can be very complex or it can be very simple, but it's really how you deliver it that really lands with your audience. So with that in mind, the things that we're going to cover today, first, we're going to talk about how you can craft a compelling story and how you need to think about your audience when you go about doing that. Then we'll talk about how to choose key takeaways and structure your talk around that. And then at the end, we'll talk about slide design, things that work, things that don't, as well as some tips on effective delivery, such as presence, pacing, and energy. We've also left time at the end for I also wanted to answer your questions about how to handle questions, and we've left time for your questions as well. So questions here will be two. One, how to handle questions, but also your questions. So as I said, we want to start with how is it that you start your presentation? And for me, every strong presentation starts with a story behind it. So you want to really take your audience on a journey. Here's a challenge. Here's why it matters. Here's what you can do to change it. Stories really stick because they have that emotional connection. Think about the last time you presented. Odds are think about the last presentation that you attended that was really meaningful. Do you remember all of the facts? Or is it that the story behind what they were telling you stuck with you? And so if you think about what resonated with you in other presentations in the past, that might also inform you how you want to think about how you start off with telling your story. And I will say it doesn't have to be anything dramatic. I mean, right now we're talking about telling a compelling story. There's nothing particularly dramatic about it. It just means that your talk needs to be organized in such a way that your audience feels like they're moving through the story on what you're saying from beginning to end. There's a storyline in what you're telling. It doesn't have to be this crazy compelling story that, it really has to do with how you're telling it. And so we'll go through each of these portions in more depth. So as I said earlier, knowing your audience is absolutely essential. So every time you give a talk, you need to start off with remembering that it's not about you. And so like a lot of times when I give a talk, the first thing I ask is, who is my audience? What do they know? Why do they care? Have they heard this material? May this look different if I'm talking to undergraduate students who are going to present at a scientific conference versus mid-level career professionals who are preparing for a job interview? Again, how I craft my story really has to do with who my audience is, who's in the room, why do they care? Again, if you don't stop to ask those questions, you risk talking past the people that you're presenting to. But if you do take that time, you are, from the beginning, tailoring your story so it lands exactly where you need it to be. Again, with your audience as the people who are walking away from that situation. And again, hopefully remembering the ideas that you share, and you making the impact that you're seeking. So once I think about my audience, the next thing I think about is my takeaways. And so we've probably seen this a gazillion times before, going to a talk where someone has tried to cram in way too much information, way too much data into a talk, and we basically walk away feeling with like those eyes glazed over because we really haven't held anything in, or we've basically lost them in the beginning of the talk, and then after that it's been a barrage of information that doesn't really make sense. And the reason, one, is because the presenter has probably thought about all the things they want to share and not necessarily about the audience. But another part of that is in reality, adults can only hold a few ideas at a single time. We really can only pay attention to, like it says, an adult attention span is maybe 10 to 20 minutes. And so when you talk for long periods of time and throw lots of information, and people are really going to get distracted, start looking on their phones, and not really listen to what you say. And so for me, I personally like to use, one, my audience, but also my time to really think about what is my takeaway. And so if I have a talk that is maybe 30 minutes, like today's, I think about how I'm going to structure my talk that they may walk away with maybe 2 to 3 takeaways at max. And how am I going to kind of, again, pace my talk in such a way that I know that they're going to really take away. And then from there, once I know what my takeaways are, I use a technique that is heavily used in teaching called backwards design, which is where you start with your end in mind. So you have your takeaways. What are the learning objectives for the class? Or in this particular case, what is it that you want your audience to know when they walk out the door? And then you decide from that, what background do they actually need to know? And what data is directly related to support that message? Because everything else that you add that isn't directly supporting actually takes away and is distracting. And so this is where you need to discern. You really need to figure out, is this necessary? Is this helping, or is this distracting? And then also making sure that you leave effective or sufficient time for questions at the end. And so this for me is like where I start with before I get anywhere else in the slot, like in developing my presentation. And then again, going back to who my audience is, who my audience is also going to impact my structure of my talk. And so there's a lot of information out there on how to use structure, or how to kind of flex your structure based off on different audiences. And so I feel like having some sort of structure for your presentation allows you to move forward and feel a lot less scattered. And when you do this, when you create structure, it's also a lot more easier for your audience to follow you when you're giving that talk. But you have to create that kind of structure when you're building out your presentation. So again, thinking about that storytelling piece, think about the talk that you're giving and what is the story arc. And so you want it to have kind of a beginning, a middle, and an end. But what your beginning will be may look different on who your audience is. So I pulled this from the American from the American Society of Advancements of Science, or the AAAS. And so what you can see here is 2 different common structures that you might give in an argument, whether it's a presentation or a conversation. The first would be with researchers. So this is a world that I came from, where we love to give that background information. What is the context? Then what are all the supporting information? And then finally, we give you the results and inclusion at the end, because we've built your trust, because you are a researcher who likes to question. And so we have to give you all of that before we give you that final conclusion. Or maybe we might have a hypothesis at first, and then we test it, and then we tell you what we believe. But if you're talking to other audiences, whether it's politicians, general public, or even, I would say a lot of times for executive leaders, time is money. They want you to get to the bottom line first. Why are you here? And then go back to, so what? Why do I, okay, you make a statement, but why do I care? And then you provide that supporting details. So again, really thinking about who your audience will be will also help you really think about what sort of structure is going to be more helpful and really grasping their attention right away, building trust, and therefore allowing you to be more confident as a researcher or as a presenter, sorry. So the next, so now I'm going to switch over slightly to the other side. So this is now thinking about once you've thought about your audience, who's your takeaway, and did that kind of backwards design, thinking about your structure, how you're going to present your story, what data you're going to include, and how you're going to frame that with your audience in mind. Then you will start going to your presentation, like an actual slide design. I like to have a very strong outline before I actually get to my slide deck, because otherwise I feel like I'm editing and re-editing my message over and over again. It's best to work, in my personal opinion, create that outline and then go and build your slide deck. And I will say, I've built slide decks for years now using a wide variety of technology. I think a lot of times when I do internal talks, I'll do pretty basic PowerPoint presentations where it's really focused on the take homes because they're internal stakeholders. But in a position like this where I'm talking about presentations, I'm talking about how to deliver your message, I spent a little bit more time trying to craft my slide decks, and I used Canva as a tool to do that, a free version of Canva. That's what I use today. But I will say that really think about who your audience is and making sure that you have that great balance of having a visually appealing slide deck, but again, using information. And if you use something that's really distracting with lots of colors, again, if you're giving that to with crazy animation and this, that, and the other thing at a scientific presentation, I don't think it would land well, but it may work really well in a different situation. So again, how you design your slides, really backwards design with your audience in mind. But tips that are always going to be very helpful is try to keep it simple, meaning try to focus on one idea per slide. I find that we often want to squeeze everything that we care about and all the nuance on there, but oftentimes that can be broken into 2 slides where maybe one slide only gets shown if someone has follow-up questions. So I love to hide extra slides at the back of my deck for the Q&A. I also like to use visuals in a way that helps me reduce text. Again, what can I do to make sure that someone can see this and have that takeaway? And again, things like too much text, writing out paragraphs, writing out exactly what you're going to read, none of that is doing you any sort of favors. That's actually when your slide deck is hurting you rather than using it as a tool to enhance your delivery. I'm a big fan of animation, but I think it needs to be done well. If animation is distracting, then it's not helping you. And again, think about your font size, your color choice, is anything, if you're going to incorporate videos, I have been in so many presentations where the right, what is it called? There's like some sort of add-in that's not there. And they keep on being like, oh, I'm trying to get this video to play, but it worked earlier. Oh, this was so good. You should have seen it. No one enjoys that. No one does. So unless your video and audio work, which you need to test in advance, do not plan to include it. And so that's just my personal opinion. I learned about this kind of easy test years ago, and I do still stick to this kind of concept is, does your slide pass the 3-second rule? And so the idea is if you were to give your slide decks to someone, if they were to look at a single slide within 3 seconds, could they identify the main idea? And oftentimes the answer is no. And that's because there's too much information on there. There's too much text. maybe our slide titles aren't really saying what we need them to say. Maybe it's just saying like graph of data entries versus the actual take home of data entries, meaning that data entries went up since implementation of new software or whatever it is. So for me, one way I like to go through this is to, again, make sure that the title of my slide is directly linked to the take home. I also personally love data because I'm a scientist, but I feel like how you use your slides and how you present data is very, very important. So I have put on here, this is directly from a paper that was published in 2017 by a friend of mine and her colleagues. And I told you earlier that I am interested in the biomedical workforce. So it's not surprised that I was interested in this particular table, which was results from a survey looking at, I think it was over 2,000 PhD graduates and looking at their career outcomes. So you can see this table is broken down by research intensive and non-research intensive, and then you have different categories and then numbers and then percents, and it's all laid out there. This was fantastic for a paper because I, as a reader, could dive through this information and get what I want. But in my personal opinion, this is not an effective way to present data in a talk. There's a lot here that is distracting. And yes, I could use animation like a big red box to highlight the one point that I want you to see, or I can transform this information to tell the story that I need it to. So what I did is I took this data set that was in someone else's paper and I transformed it into a simple pie chart to really demonstrate what my key takeaway was. So in this particular talk, or the way I show the data, I was just showing the wide variety of careers that that PhDs went through. And so you can see right off, you have administration and business side of science, and it's even telling you a couple of the categories got pulled together. Oh, I was wrong. There's over 3,000 respondents in this survey. But I actually when I actually used this data in the past, this was my first reiteration of what I thought I wanted to present, but this is actually where I landed, where I was really using that data set to tell my story. So when I would use this slide often when I was doing onboarding with new biomedical PhDs who were first starting their training, where I would talk about career outcomes for people with similar training. So I would say, based off of national data, we know that 50% of biomedical PhDs use their scientific training to stay in research-intensive careers. And that can range anywhere from academic careers such as tenure track to non-tenure track positions, careers in biotech, pharma, government, and even in nonprofits. For me, I did my postdoc at St. Jude, so that's actually what's considered a nonprofit research organization. But then you see the other 50% using their biomedical PhD training in what's considered non-research intensive skill setting, where they're using their scientific training to answer scientific problems, but not in the lab. This could be through scientific consulting, business development, regulatory affairs, helping or working at the FDA, making sure that drugs are reviewed properly so before they hit the market. I now work in a space called science policy, where I help advocate for scientific funding or effective training environments for the next generation. And things like teaching, administration, science outreach and communication, there's just so much you can do with this degree. Again, if I was to try to tell that story with this table, would you be able to follow my story as well as if this one, which really to me is the visually appealing version, where data is really powerful, but also focused in such a way that you can understand and make it, and it really does make a lasting impression. So again, I want to go back to this formula that I told you earlier about, which is message plus delivery equals impact. Again, delivery, it's not just about the volume and speaking clearly. It's really about your energy, your pacing, your presence, your eye contact. You know, I'm doing this visually, but I'm still trying to look at the camera. We will have time for Q&A, things like that. But giving time to even pause in your talk strategically, allow people to take information, changing your tone, all of those things can really help with delivering your message in a way that allows you to have real influence. So we're going to switch one more time from what is it you're going to say to how are you going to design your slide deck to work in your favor to how is it that you're going to deliver your message to really make that impact. So as you hopefully understand now, how you say something really does matter. So we talked about speaking with energy, how pace can be important. And I did an exercise recently. I told you I went to a presentation where someone talked about how we need to flex our communication to make sure our message fits. And one of the activities they had us do is to say a single sentence over and over again, but with every time you say it, emphasize a different word. How you speak matters. How you speak matters. How you speak matters. How you speak, it matters. Again, how you emphasize something, what words you emphasize can really change how people are perceiving that message. And so thinking about that, especially when it comes to your key takeaways, might be very important. And I try my best to use my body language intentionally instead of in a distracting way. So I will share that I have learned that sometimes my body language is distracting and has not always been helpful. And I have learned that through looking at the audience and using kind of their feedback as a gauge to figure out how I'm doing. So here I've given a couple of tips on how to think about virtual versus in-person presentations and what to keep in mind. So as I said, when you are doing an in-person presentation, you have the ability to really look at the audience and then kind of react in real time. So if everyone in the audience looks confused, that's a great time to be like, okay, before we move forward, I just want to remind everyone, or let's go back to that intro slide remember that model I showed you. This is where we're at in the process. And what I've also done here is I shared one slide multiple times. So I was able to go back to that early message and kind of get you back to that main point again of delivery, a message plus delivery equals impact. So those sort of things can help whether you're in person or not. Here, the audience is seeing you in person, so you have a lot more ability to have an influence, but they may or may not be able to see you as well if you're doing a virtual presentation. So also think about whether you're going to be on the slide or on the corner of the slide or things like that. Sometimes I also, if I'm going to be in the corner of the presentation, if it's something that I'm recording, I also think about where my video will come up on my presentation to make sure it doesn't block any important data points or something like that. And other things like that. I think personally, I feel like virtual presentations are much, much more challenging to stay engaged because there's so much more opportunity for your audience to get distracted, to click another tab and start checking email. So doing things which I didn't do today, which I wish I should have, is trying to incorporate more engagement strategies in your talk. You can do these in both virtual and person, but I think that there's very, very important in virtual settings, again, because engagement can go down. So asking questions, inviting reflections, using tools like virtual polls, shows of hands, or even asking like, how many of you, and then asking for a response in the chat box. All of these things can really help people pay more attention, as well as begin to process your information better, because they're often thinking about it in the context of their day-to-day lives, because again, you're engaging them, that they're not necessarily just sitting taking information once you do start including some of those engagement strategies. I will say in the scientific space, I often would talk about things that were incredibly complex. And oftentimes I would be giving presentations to, because I worked in translational medicine, I would give talks to MDs who weren't necessarily in the research space. And so while they were incredibly intelligent individuals, they weren't well versed on the things that I was specifically studying. And so I'd often use things like analogies or really great visual representations, and even kind of short stories to help people understand what I was talking about, or again, using analogies like what is DNA? Again, I know that MDs know what a DNA is, but if I was giving it to a more lay audience, I might do some analogy about DNA being similar to our writing, that you have letters that make up words, very similar to amino acids make up is the code for proteins, and that codes everything in our life. Obviously, I would work better at that analogy if I was trying to give it in a compelling sort of way. And remember to adjust your presentation on your audience. And so again, if you have the ability to see them, think about, are you talking too fast? Do you need to maybe say, I was hoping to cover this, but due to time, we're going to actually skip this and move forward. And that ability to flex your communication skill on the spot, I think, is incredibly helpful and is a sign of an effective communicator. And the last thing I want to do before we close out is to talk about how to handle questions. So I'll be honest with you, handling questions now is much, much easier for me than it was earlier in my career. I remember I was at a major scientific conference. My MD boss wanted me to give a presentation at this very large international society about infectious diseases. And during that, I was getting a bunch of questions that were kind of over my head from various medical doctors. And instead of saying the things that I share here, like, that's a great question, I haven't considered that, I'd like to think about that more. I had said to them, that's a great question, but that's beyond the scope of what I'm going to be studying as a PhD student. So I don't know. Basically telling them I don't care. Afterwards, I learned that that is not the best way to handle questions, because you want to be gracious and thankful for the questions that you get, even if you find them to be silly or out of left field. I've also gotten questions where I've not been able to necessarily understand what people are saying, or I assume what they're saying. So I've learned to also repeat questions frequently, just to clarify that I'm asking the question correctly. Because you don't want to go on a tangent answering something that someone didn't even ask. And I will say, in general, most people are already thinking about what they're going to say before the other person stops talking. So I think it really is important to be an active listener when you are giving a presentation, so you fully understand their question and you can answer it with clarity in the way, and hopefully maybe even get at a question, because sometimes there's a question behind the question. And so if you listen really carefully, sometimes you can, again, get to that question behind the question versus really hitting that superficial level question that they're first addressing you. So for me, to really help, I like to anticipate the questions ahead of time. You can use technology like ChatGPT or generative AI to be like, what sort of questions may I get with this audience in mind? And there are simple phrases like, I don't have those numbers, but I'm happy to follow up, or I haven't analyzed it that way, but based off of my experience, I think XYZ. So again, there are ways to handle questions where you're not like, thank you, but no thank you, which is essentially what I did with my first major scientific conference. I'm sure my PI was more than delighted by that. And so again, key takeaways, the three things one, if you can remember the video or that graph, message plus delivery equals impact, you're good. But if you want to remember a few more things, one is just be intentional from the get-go. Focus on your takeaways, structure your talk around that, really based off of how much time and who your audience is. Again, deliver with impact. It's not just about getting a really nice slide deck together. It's about practicing, making sure you know how to handle transitions in your talk. Where is it that you need a little bit more time? Practice explaining a complex concept to your audience. And again, really thinking about how is it that you can make this an engaging experience for them, where they're taking the time out of the day to be here. So how can you make that enjoyable for them? And how can you make sure that your ideas stick? So with that, that's me wrapping up. I want to say thank you for the opportunity to provide some insight today, and hopefully it's been helpful. But with that, I'd like to open up the floor to take any questions you might have.
And while folks are thinking about their questions, I just want to say thank you so much to Dr. Neely for sharing her time with us today to be able to present this slide deck. I took a lot from this. I think I'll be using that key points or takeaways needed depending on the length of the presentation. And for those of you who are in attendance, there's a survey that you can either scan on your phone using the QR code on your screen, or if you look in the chat, if you happen to be attending from your cell phone, you can just click the URL in the chat and that'll take you over to the survey. Let us know how you felt about today's session, what sessions you'd like to see in the future, and give us some helpful feedback to keep providing you all with useful materials. But thank you again, Dr. Neely, for being here.
No problem.
Yeah. While folks may be thinking about questions, I'll ask a question. When dealing with a audience that you think may be more reluctant to engage, maybe undergrads or disinterested high schoolers who I'm speaking for myself now, disinterested high schoolers who you're trying to talk to about the value of higher education, what are some things that you may suggest in engaging, an audience like that?
I would have, again, audience in mind, like your audience in mind. What do they care about? So, is it that they're worried about being able to buy a house? This is one thing I keep on hearing is that, the price of housing has gone up, that people are really worried about the ability to buy a house one day. I don't know, that might be not so much what high schoolers think about, because I work with PhD, postdoc and above, as well as little kids, which I can tell you what they care about, 6 and under. But I would really think about what it is that they care about, and then hone your message to around that. So I say this as I now am working out science policy space. And so one of the things that I have to do is I have to try to figure out how to get politicians to care about funding for science. So I can lead with all of the important things that are being done that are funded by NIH. Like, this research is so important and it leads to all of this medical advancements and blah, 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 blah. But they don't necessarily care quite as much. What they care about is their constituents and getting if they're up, for election, will people who have elected them, will they reelect them? So if you talk more about your community, how many people in your community suffer from a specific cancer type, and that how your research is really related to impacting those people and maybe even preventing. Like, so I previously worked at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. One of the talking points I always had was that when St. Jude first started, the survival rate for acute lymphoblastic leukemia was, I think it was like less than 6%. And I wish I remembered all of this. It was like at the tip of my tongue when I was at St. Jude, because I used to give tours all the time to prospective people who were thinking about working there, and would talk about the mission. But after St. Jude was formed and all this initial research was done, the survival rate went up to 90%.
Wow.
And like right now, it's like a completely survivable disease due to the research specifically on pediatric cancer and trying to improve survival rates. You go from something that is basically a death sentence to like now these kids go on to live completely like there's not full lives. What most of the research is to like reduce side effects now, which is where we want to be as a society. So again, thinking about like, oh, what do you care about? You may not care about like the specific research I'm doing, but you do care about your constituents and how many of them are impacted and how is my research maybe linked to that? Maybe not directly, but again, like if it's within the field of cancer, maybe I can say like, again, this is how it's been successfully done in the past. What I'm trying to do is this. Or right now, I do a lot of advocacy for international scholars. They're a huge part of the STEM pipeline. And so a lot of times I'm advocating about how much economic benefit how it benefits the US financially to have international scholars in the United States. Is that why I think they should be here? Because it's good for our economy? That's not my viewpoint. But it may be a viewpoint that might stick with someone who's at an elected level, who is thinking, well, why should I care about international scholars? They're not voting me in. But if I can say, this is how much money goes into your district because of international student enrollment, and this is how many stay for OPT, CPT, and they have these jobs. Again, I'm sharing data that helps with the other person's decision making. It helps them think the way I want them to think. Maybe they're not thinking about the personal reasons and all of, but I might flex that message differently based off of, like talking to someone who's running a program, who's more involved with students day to day. So again, really knowing your audience allows you to flex your message, whether it's through one-on-one conversations or giving presentations that allows you to make connections because you're meeting the other person where they're at versus you spewing all of the things that you know at them.
That's very insightful, and I like that. Frame the data in a way in regards to what's important to that person. So it's a great takeaway. Dr. Neely gave the most comprehensive speech anyone could ever give on communicating effectively and did just as her slide title declared. So thank you again, Dr. Neely, for your time. Thank you to everyone who stopped by for this iteration of the Paws Pivot webinar series, and we look forward to seeing you all again next month.
Have a great day, everyone.